Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Back again. Another week, another session, another episode. Today, we bring in another legend. Last week, we talked about total losses. Today, we're going to talk about repairable disputes. That's more my bag, even though total losses are more fun for me. But repair disputes has become very quickly our both strength and burden. What do they say? Uh, it's both a blessing and a curse. So yeah, we're gonna get into it deep. So today, my guest, he's one of us. I'd like to call him, as they do in Star Wars, the student now teaches the master, because he does 99% of them. So without further ado, big guest, Kevin Cooper, of CTI, also of ACRC Consulting. Kevin, tell me a little about yourself, and then we'll start talking.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I've learned basically everything that I know in this business, probably from Billy. So it's a good thing that we're here, and love doing basically a lot of consumer protection stuff. I'm in a body shop. Do work for Lexus Sarasota, the Body Works over there. But I started in this industry as an appraiser for Geico probably 15 years ago now. Floated between shops in New York and Florida, and really found a home basically helping out customers with collision training institute, and especially my forte, really repair disputes. So thank you for having me.
Beautiful. Well, you can loosen up a little bit. That's fine. We're gonna have some fun. We're gonna talk a lot of shit. So this is always good. I'm probably gonna get some fun comments from this one. Total losses, really, no one has a ton of interest in them. But repair disputes, there's this small fraternity of people in our industry that can actually do these effectively. And we're two of them, more so you at this point. But
Yeah, it's an interesting world, the repair dispute world.
yeah, and I'm sure my notes are going to even compare to the roads that we're going to travel over the next 20 minutes, half hour, and it may go over. So it's all right. Good thing I have a good enough account where I can spend some time to edit this thing. All right, cool. So we're going to start down that path, my friend, where I want you to tell me, beginning to end, just like we did last episode. Tell me the process. I'm going to jump in. I'm going to wait till you're done, and then I'm going to write down questions as we go, because I want to hear your position, and it's the same as mine. But I want to see, from the second that you get the assignment, the second the customer calls and says, "This is what we need to do," how do we do it? Go.
So repair disputes can happen at any point in a repair process. It can happen pre-repair, in the middle of repair, or even at a final bill or afterwards when there is any discrepancy between what the repair cost actually is and what the insurance company is willing to compensate the customer for fairly. Appraisal clause, I like to consider it as a last case scenario, like last resort. Try to exhaust all other options, negotiations with the insurance company, because once it does go to appraisal clause, it very rarely takes less than several months to get sorted out, because insurance carriers, they don't want to rush that process. They try to delay as long as possible. So if you ever get in that situation where you are in a dispute, basically where the insurance company is saying it's 5,000 to repair it, the repair facility is saying it's 10,000 to repair it, um, I would exhaust every option, attempt to do supplements before going to the appraisal clause in your policy. So the first thing, if you're going to invoke your appraisal clause, you have to check your policy and make sure you actually have the repair dispute clause in there. There are some carriers out there that do not have it, so you need to see what it says and what clarifications are in there, because some will say competent, impartial, and independent. Others will just say competent. So there are some carriers that will hire their own appraisers as to handle repair disputes, which isn't a conflict of interest, but technically not illegal. So they kind of try to stack the cards in their favor as much as possible. Um, when we get the repair disputes or the phone calls from the customer at that point, we let them know that it's not a quick process. It's one of those things that's going to take time. from start to finish. We get all the photos, we get all the repair estimates, so we can kind of familiarize ourselves with it. And then we start preparing our own repair plan for what was done on the car, which is as accurate as possible. That's when the other appraiser from the other insurance carrier, if they accept the invocation, would start that process. We go back and forth, hopefully coming to a settlement. If they're unable to come to a settlement, it goes to umpire, which is an additional cost that's bared with both the insured and the insurer. And we submit all the paperwork to them, and whatever their final judgment would be binding to the insurer to pay. Sometimes that could take a week. Sometimes that could take 12 months or longer. So there's no time frame or guarantees on any of that stuff. But that's more or less what appraisal clause is in a nutshell.
Wow. So I want everybody out there watching it, look at my notes here just from hearing that. So you just sparked my memory up, and we're gonna go down the rabbit hole. I'm gonna go right down the list. Although I will warn everyone and all the viewers that it may bounce around. So just to kind of decompress and unpack what Kevin just said, and it'll lead into my first question and our first discussion is last resort, right? And now I'm going to kind of put the ball in the tee for you here. And it's something we get all the time, whether we see it on social media, which is it's active, whether we represent an insurer or we represent a consumer. It really is the same. We're going to really dive into what happens on both sides, but because some are both equally as culpable, and we see some stories there, and we're going to hope to kind of dispel some bad stuff that goes on. But the first thing I want to talk about is last resort, because it really is the onset of it. Kev, let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, and why it is a last resort. When we talk to a client, they're in a bad place. They say, well, there's an X amount of spread between the insurance company or the shop to the insurance company, no matter what we represent. And I say the same thing to an insurance carrier that we represent. It is a last resort, namely because of two things, because of cost and because of time. Those are the two things. We already know, Kevin mentioned that when invoked, there's a cost for that. Whoever is going to represent them, us, a colleague in the industry, that's a cost. Kevin mentioned the umpire. If it goes to that, where most of them go to, we're going to touch on that too. Most of the time, that is another cost, how that goes. And there's time. So we've had, and I'm going to let you really take the ball from here, but on average, how long do these usually take, at least for you? I can answer it, but I think we have the general same answer.
I would say the general average is somewhere between 75 to about 135 days. So you're talking about around 3 months would be about the mean for usual repair disputes between going back and forth from invocation to finalization.
Right. And just get into a potential, you've had these conversations, but when you have the conversation with a consumer and you explain to them, yeah, you sure you want to do this? Explain to me how that kind of conversation looks like.
I had the conversation yesterday with a customer. There's a $3,500 dispute, and they invoke their right to appraisal. Right off the bat, there's the costs to us. So if that difference, what you'd be paying, you kind of have to take that into account, because the repair award letter is not going to include that. So that's an outside cost that you would still be responsible for regardless. So you kind of have to weigh the cost versus loss balance there. So if you have $1,000 difference between an insurance carrier's estimate and the repair facility's estimate, my recommendation would be to pay that difference and take it up in small claims court. Generally, most states have the ability, a certain limit in to submit a small claims thing. That would probably be your best bet. When you're talking 3, 4, 5, 6, 7+ $1,000 difference, which does happen, those are the times that would be more advantageous to think about handling it as an appraisal clause. And that's a conversation that you'd have to think about thoroughly, and have a conversation with the repair facility as well, because some repair facilities will not touch the car until they know what they're getting paid. Others will do it in good faith, and they have confidence that we are able to settle it for an amount that is fair to them to correctly repair the vehicle with manufacturer specifications. Because let's face it, insurance companies, their goal is to pay the least amount of money possible to fix the vehicle in their eyes. There's a lot of repair facilities out there these days that have educated themselves, and a lot of certifications and a lot of training. And the repair industry is changing to more proper repairs and bringing the vehicle correctly to the pre-loss condition, not the way it was 20, 30 years ago, which a lot of the insurance companies still think it is. So
Beautiful. Yeah, that's true. I think there's definitely a noticeable shift. I mean, just based on the volume that we're receiving. So when it gets to when I first started doing it, maybe one a month, and then now we're getting multiples a week, 5, 10, 15, and some of them aren't fruitful. Some of them just don't make sense, which is going to lead directly to my next point. I think, and this might take us for a few minutes to do this, but I think one of the biggest things that we need to discuss is just the misunderstanding of the process. I think, yeah, we touched on, yeah, it's a last resort. We're past that. But now let's say we're moving on. The client says, yeah, I want to pursue this. They're obviously, and I'm explaining in general terms on both sides, because I think both sides are equally misguided on how this process works. So one, and this is kind of like a 3-4 tiered question, but one, the customer via the shop or vice versa, they often don't understand when you can invoke. We mentioned earlier that it can happen at any moment. So you could do it on the first inspection. If that fails, you could do it in the middle. You could do it at the very end as a final bill RTA or right to appraisal. And so it's common that they don't understand. But there's also heavy drawbacks at each stage. So if you do, and it's for either side. So if you do an appraisal clause, and I'll let you kind of dive in your opinion on this. If you do it at the first stage, since the decision is binding, whether you settle or the umpire makes an award, it's binding. So what happens is that theoretically the clock stops. So if you haven't repaired the car yet, if let's say there is no supplement, this is what the total cost of repair is going to be. If you do it in the middle, you still have that exposure, but you do have some more evidence, which can or cannot hurt you. Final bill is the most effective, at least in my opinion, on either side, because it's the most. There's the most evidentiary information there. There's the most documentation. There's the more thorough observance of the physical repair, because then you have photos of it in the booth and structural. But that's the key word: photos. I mentioned misunderstanding is oftentimes we'll get calls and they'll say, well, I don't have any photos. Well, I'd be like, good luck, because you're going to lose, because now everything is called into question. And that's where most clients, with guidance from their shop perhaps, often get stuck. And they say, well, I don't have any photos, but this is what the OEMs tell us we need to do. Yeah, that works. But you got to remember, you're invoking an appraisal clause as per the policy, which what I want you to touch on is what other things can come up that may work depending on the stage, may not work. Where are they misinformed? Any observation you may had on multiple times of going through this process.
So in the beginning, I call it a pre-repair, a disassembly pre-repair RTA is probably the most difficult ones, because you don't know what your final bill is going to be. I mean, you can come close, but you don't know what problems you might run into when you're repairing the car. So it's something I strongly discourage against. Right now, we are actually handling one as for one of our clients in West Texas, and we're having that exact problem. We're $14,000 difference with the adverse appraiser. But when you look at his repair estimate and our repair plan, It's actually very similar, and the main difference is there's an $11,000 difference in parts.
Mhm.
And the other appraiser's point,
Nailed it.
and I understand it, is the policy allows for it. If you can show me how these parts aren't like kind of quality, we can address that. But now we're in a very difficult situation that even if we select an umpire, that ruling might not be in favor of the customer because the umpire's invocation, he may take a stance more towards position statements for the manufacturer, or he may take a more insurance friendly role and saying, "Hey, they went into contract and agreed with this policy, which allows for LKQ aftermarket non OEM parts." So, I strongly discourage if you have a heavy part estimate to do a pre repair. That's what those last resorts would be. When you when you've attempted to basically every last little bit to try to mitigate the loss for the customer at that point would be when you would do it. So if you have like a small repair, key scratches, and there's just a difference in fundamentals and it's all labor, that might be a better RTA when there's no parts differences, stuff like that in the pre-repair stage.
Mhm. Excellent.
Uh,
Excellent. So we mentioned all of the topics, and I think that's the biggest where they say, well, you know what, the number is this, but you got the biggest key to understand is policy. When you're dealing with policy, policy trumps everything else. Just, I want to add this, and this is a big one that we encounter all the time. If the carrier believes or states that, hey, that's not related, whether we agree with it or not, UPD is policy. That's their position. So those things cannot be touched or addressed in the appraisal clause. As crazy as it may sound, as much as we believe that it might, it's something we can talk about whether we believe it's related, but at the end of the day, if it's determined that it's not related from the loss, then it can't be addressed in an appraisal clause.
yeah,
uh
the insurance company has the right to deny damages if they feel it's not related, as long as they have supporting evidence.
Perfect. Now, here's something that's interesting. Oh, just going through my notes. I want to discuss just some of the other like ancillary things. We mentioned we mentioned the length. Mentioned that it could be the last resort. Something that we get all the time, and this may go into policy, but I want you to explain it. Often we get, well, our client will say, well, often, hey, well, my facility has charges. Explain to me, is charges from the facility, is that pursuable in an appraisal clause setting?
You can invoke your appraisal clause in regards to just total loss charges if you feel that the insurance company is not compensating you fairly for the loss. It's very rare. It has happened. I haven't partaken myself in any of those, but I have spoken to appraisers that have handled those, and they're very unique situations. And doesn't happen too often though, but it's happening more and more these days that you can invoke in regards to the charges themselves on a total loss.
Right. And it's a very, very fine line, mind you, because you got to remember the insured invoked. Now you it gets dicey because here's another thing where people get confused on either side. Just like the repair facility can't get himself involved in the physical negotiation because it's independent. What I really want to talk about now is the approach. When you approach an appraisal clause estimate, I say it all the time. This is not a staff appraiser versus a body shop. This is two independent appraisers discussing damages. The reason why I bring this up is because often what gets discussed is labor rate, which again, it's out for discussion, but it's two independent sources determining a repair, I'd say a value of a loss. Let's say that. So, what's your opinion on labor rate, other ancillary items that may or may not, in your belief, are pursuable in appraisal clause? What are some of the things that you encounter?
So the best way to put that, if you're a repair facility that's educating your clients on right to appraisal, and your only difference is labor rate, that is not a good reason to be submitting an appraisal clause invocation. Um, yes, labor rates are negotiable, as in every aspect of the claim, hazardous waste, labor rates, paint, frame, electrical, diagnostic, every operation and labor rate is negotiable. But the fundamental reason for the RTA should never be based solely around labor rate because it's not one you're going to win generally.
Yeah.
Um,
No, go ahead.
insur Insurance companies use labor rates and accepted labor rates in market areas, and that's what they will use against you if you're going up against a labor to try to obtain a higher labor rate through a right to appraisal. It's not something that I recommend. It's a byproduct of doing an RTA the correct way sometimes, but it doesn't guarantee that the RTA is going to guarantee you getting that rate going forward either.
Yeah, I agree. I just had this conversation the other day, and it was a facility asking me like if my customer wants to pursue a, RTA based on labor rate alone. My return question would be, okay, so think about this process. It's not you invoking. It never is the shop invoking. It's the client. So what's the economic impact as as to the damages that would trigger an appraisal clause assignment? That's where you have to think. There may be a difference there, but what is the appraiser assessing on a new appraisal by an independent party in regards to damages with labor rate, or at least labor rate alone? I agree with you. It's more of a byproduct rather than an invocation reason. But that's another big misconception where people think that they can do just for that. It's not an instrument for a shop for sure. It's an instrument for the consumer. And in times we've had them for insurance carriers that have invoked. I just finished one up now that invoked themselves. So it can kind of go both ways, or they can lead you saying, hey, maybe you want to invoke your appraisal clause if you don't believe that our number is fair. That in its bare bones, strip everything down, and that's what it is. It's an two independent third parties that engage and make an assessment and an opinion of loss of, let's say, value loss, and that's bottom line. Whether it's a total loss or repairable, repairable gets ugly because it's just so many moving pieces that people don't understand. The other thing that I want to talk to you about is this could, if you don't understand this process in depth, then what can happen is a lot of bad things can happen. And bad things in the sense of one error in A, how you negotiate, B, how you delay, C, if you're not providing an appraisal. The overarching theme is we face time because A, there could be delays in either side. B, there could be, I hate to say it, laziness, but there is now no real enforcement. So you can prompt, I think it's Ohio, where if it's not within, I think 3 weeks, I believe. Again, don't I'm paraphrasing, but I know we've had them where you can pursue through the insurance or Department of Financial Services for that state and enforce a show cause to say, why haven't you engaged? Rhode Island is way different, where it's like you got, I believe, 72 hours, I think, to, I guess, name an appraiser. And if you don't respond, then the ruling defers immediately to the insured. So there's a lot of different rules in a lot of states, but that's where it gets dirty too, because appraisers just frankly don't understand the process, and they go for things like in your case that you mentioned, the spread, as I say it, is the parts. Guess what? It's policy. If you could prove to me that these aren't effective for this specific repair, yeah, I can argue that. But if it's not, if it's a strict aftermarket, like kind and quality issue, then guess what? It's your policy's language. Yeah, the consumer chose that. So yeah, it's not going to be an argument that anybody could take, you know. But that being said, what are some of the how do I frame this question the right way? If you had to think of one thing that really occurs every time, and you've represented both sides too, What are the one thing that's consistent that really hangs up this process?
The biggest downfall to the right to appraisal process, especially in recent months more so than not, is insurance companies are receiving them a whole lot more. You speak to other appraisers that work generally for the insurance company, they are handling them dozens more than they were the year before. So it's
Mhm.
becoming a more educated policy, educated client. And the insurance companies are responding in kind, and they are hiring appraisers that are in line with what their policy allows rather than truly independent.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of their policies don't specify that you need to be independent. That's why it always refers back to you need to understand your policy and what you're invoking exactly. Because one, it could say competent, independent, or just competent. Um, and they're doing everything to delay and push these to umpire, which is an additional cost without truly negotiating, even though they're doing it in vain, which is the biggest downfall we've been seeing recently. So
Mhm.
it's been a much more difficult landscape with the appraisers that they are signing.
That's a fantastic idea. I mean, I'm sorry, fantastic point. But and we've had those, and wow, it's been a while where we would get a call back from an appraiser, and it's actually a staff appraiser from that same carrier. I'm like, but then if you look at some policy languages say competent. So here's where the difference could be made, where you're like, well, he can't do that. Yeah, sure, you can argue that, but if the policy language says it's competent, that one that you had a year or two ago, that we were like, okay, this one's odd, but how do you consider yourself independent? But then as we looked at the policy language, it says, well, it just says competent, doesn't say independent. Some policies will list independent on it, and those are the ones that you can slam home. But I guess that those are the policy language adjustments that we're seeing a lot more. Luckily, I haven't seen anything recently that like that one that we had a year or two ago. We're really put the consumer in a bad spot. But I think the overarching thing that we're seeing, at least what I'm seeing, is that I'm getting more and more phone calls from other people that have never done these before, and they are calling me for advice. And I'm telling them, I'm like, listen, there's really no way to advise you on how to handle these. I physically can't do it for you. You know, because there's so many turns that these could take where you really have to know policy. For example, we mentioned it before. If you're not aware that this decision is binding, then you're not going to inform your consumer that the decision's binding. And that one little decision can change, like, wait, okay, I'm not going to invoke at this time because I don't know what's going to be presented. So it'll change your approach on the complete appraisal. In turn, if you don't know and you don't advise your client the correct way to invoke or how to invoke or if it's the right time, you go ahead, you get settlement, you believe it's a good settlement, everybody's made whole, but yet again, you have 1,000+ bill in the end that you cannot pursue. So it's very easy to go down a bad path. I want to shift gears here really quick. And this is one that's really hot, and we see it a lot. And we've navigated these many, many times. You and I both, sometimes together. When you take, and I'm going to let you take the ball and run with it. When you get an appraisal clause for a vehicle that should have been totaled, and it's not, and it's written as a repair, and it comes up as a repairable dispute, explain to me, A, how you approach it or what you see, and then B, what's the correct action in order to get a fair and equitable settlement for either side, by the way.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope going down
Yep.
that. The first and most important thing, and education wise, is it is a repair dispute that you're having. It is not a repair versus total loss dispute. Many states out there don't have thresholds. So make right 100%. There's New York, North Carolina 75%, New Jersey, Texas, Florida 100%. So each state, you have to be aware of what you're negotiating in. And sometimes you have to think about what year the car is, because certain states like New York, 8 model years or newer is the regulation over there that would determine a vehicle a total loss, which would be 75%. So it's a repair dispute in its fundamental basis right there. That's the first and most important thing. And generally speaking, we're hired to settle a stated value for the loss in a repair dispute. We are not settling a total loss value. If the other appraiser is open to it, and some states do have policy language that requires you to state a value and a repair value, the insurance carrier is the one in the end that makes the determination on whether a vehicle is a total loss. And that's usually by their policy and also by the state that it is invoked in. So it all depends. And we have no control over it. If we write more than what the vehicle is worth, and the insurance carrier turns around and goes, well, that's what we're going to pay as a repair. And they can walk away, and then your charges with the shop, you still may owe those charges to the shop because they're saying it's repairable at that point. So it's a very slippery slope. It's one you have to go in there with caution, and there needs to be an open conversation and an honest conversation to let you know what the outcomes might be about that. But in the end, it's a repair dispute, not a total loss settlement at that point.
Yeah, that's super, super. I agree 100%. If you're a consumer and you're watching, or anyone involved in this process and you're watching this, I can tell you with great certainty, based on experience, when you're dealing with a repairable vehicle that you're invoking under the guise that you believe it's a total loss, trust me when I tell you, many times this has happened where we'll negotiate, we'll settle at an amount that would exceed the ACV of the vehicle, and they've paid for repair. It could happen. It's happened before. So you must be ready for it. If you're a consumer and you're showing this to a shop right now because they don't know what to do, trust me when I tell you, in that case, it could go really bad. I will add this. It could go either way. If it gets to umpire, the umpire might recognize that it's a total loss, and he or she is well within their right to do so. They may sometimes annotate on an award letter that it may be a total loss, which is great. We've had that too, where even one I had the other day on a 73 Citron, I mentioned it in the total loss pod, that we both agreed that the verbiage on the award letter must be that it's a total loss. He had no obligation to do so. I don't either. But what it does is that it prompts the carrier to say, all right, we now have to shift to a value. If you're discussing ACV, be careful with that too. I'm going to let you jump in, because if you're put in a place where you're there to determine ACV as well, it better be accurate. Because if it's not, you're in a position where you may hurt your consumer or put them in a bad position with a, let's just say, I'm not going to say lazy value, but I'll say not as descript and not as specific. So you got to think about that. If you have an agreement with the other appraiser that you do believe that it's a total loss and you want to get a quick ACV snapshot to determine that it's a total loss or show that it's a total loss, that's fine. I know, Kevin, yourself, you've had one of the appraisers actually list, right, if I remember this correctly, that in the award letter, like, this ACV is not listed for settlement. It's listed to illustrate that it's a total loss. That's happened all the time too. But going back to just overall knowledge of the whole process, knowing what could happen, and this is really common, guys. When it gets to repair and you believe it's a total loss and they're paying to repair it, just expect that they're going to come back paying over the ACV just to repair it. Anything else to add on that, Kev?
No, you basically touched on everything. It's a slippery slope when you get into that. And just tread carefully because the insurance company, and no matter how clear your award letter is, they will attempt to skew that in
Hmm.
their favor. So
Right.
we've had some award letters that we've come to an agreement that states repair value is A, salvage value is B, ACV is C, and they'll just go, yep, but the repair value is not 75%. So we're just going to repair the car then.
Hmm.
Even
And they
though that
know it's
wasn't
binding. And they know it's binding. So remember that. Be sure of when you invoke and if you invoke. If you invoke at the wrong time, just know that it's final. So that's a gigantic thorn in our side every day. When we get those, we're like, oh man. So if you're doing it and if you want to understand and have a window in our world, if we see a final bill RTA, that's gold because there's a lot of ways you could do it. You could advocate for the final bill of the repair facility of choice, which we never do. We like to ascertain and articulate our own appraisal. Kevin, I know you do. So, and I've done either way. And advocating for a final bill is a little bit more difficult. Some of our colleagues may disagree. I find that we write our own appraisal that it is more effective. However, Kevin, I'm going to get you 2 cents on this. You have to remember, Kevin, where does the payment go when the RTA is settled?
That's up to the insurance
Most
carrier
of the time. Right, right.
to the
But
customer,
to the customer, well, let me rephrase that and reframe that.
to the insured.
To the insured. I've seen it go the other way. And I go back to another horror story. If you do a final bill RTA and you release that vehicle and back to the customer because it's a lot of time, just know that that insured is getting paid. They're likely they're going to get paid, which brings into my other point. If we're writing our appraisal, we don't pay attention to theirs at all. And let's say it's a final bill. True or false question. Is it true or false that you can or cannot exceed the final bill amount? And you can, but then what happens to that excessive number that goes over the final bill?
You're asking the tough ones today. I see that.
I have to, man. The world's watching.
So it does happen where, and it happens more often than people like to realize, is that yeah, even the shop's repair plan wasn't complete and for everything that they did, and you do settle for more than what the final bill is. If you are doing a final bill RTA and you're presenting the facility's final bill and you end up settling or the umpire makes a ruling that it was not sufficient to repair, technically the repair facility is owed the final bill. Anything over the top of that would go to the insured,
Mm-hmm. That's
technically
important
speaking.
too, because we get them and they'll say, wow, this is great. Like, what do I do? It's more than my facility's final bill. It's not our concern. It's an independent appraisal. We don't care. And if it is, just know if you're a consumer watching this, you that's yours. Whatever's over the final bill, I would venture to say it's law. Uh, don't quote me on that. But the facility of choice is owed its final bill amount, not what exceeds that final bill. So think about that. And that's another reason whether you do or you don't invoke. Or more so, if you're the consumer, you may want to invoke based on that. However, there are times, but those are outliers. Typically, uh, they don't come near it. Uh, and now I'm going to kind of wrap things up, but this is kind of where it gets funny. You know, unfortunately, a part of this job that we do, this fraternity of people that actually can do these well, and there literally is. I can count them on two hands that do these really well. Um, Meddling is an issue. Can you agree with that?
It's getting worse.
It's getting worse, but it's worse. It's bad, and this is where the one thing I will say, it's bad on both sides. Because let's talk exactly what the reality is. Like we choose at CTI to speak to only the insured. Because it's important that the consumer is informed about the good, the bad, the ugly, or what might happen.
Mhm.
We do reach out to the repair facility of choice to gain documentation, photos, uh, bills, sublet invoices. We'll do that. But unfortunately, and we'll talk about that side first, the the repair facility of choice likes to meddle in the sense that they want to make sure that they have a say, but they don't. When I've done appraisal clauses back in the day, you would have to do it in person at the shop. Now it's all digital and virtual, but they would often try to come in the conversation and try to give their 2 cents on what they think. You're out of it. Kick them out of the room. And then I'm going to get your point here too. When you think about the insurance meddling that we're seeing, is more so of, well, we and I don't see it personally. When I represent insurance companies, I will say from the other side, I do see the meddling. But when I get it, we're lucky in the sense that we're getting real good cooperation. I don't know if that's because we set the groundwork early. Maybe I say this is independent. I'm going to make my decision. That's it. The only time that I'll involve them is when we're determining an umpire or do we settle. That's the only time. But I'll say the insurance medals more so on the choice of umpire, which I'm going to let you hold your breath because you're going to get into that, or perhaps labor rate as a portion. That's a big one. Uh, and in really rare cases, they'll get involved on physical procedures. I don't see that really too often. I have seen that, but what's your thoughts on the whole meddling thing on either side?
I would say the majority of appraisers, regardless of who they hire, will err on the side of procedures being followed by the manufacturer because a lot of those are required, even if it says the word recommended. When
Right.
that boils down to it, that's a requirement to be done. Um, I've been flat out told by adverse appraisers, yeah, we're told not to select any of your umpires because none of your umpires are insurance friendly.
Hmm. You beat me to
So
the punch. Yeah.
at that point, you kind of sit there and turn around and say, so how are you acting independent? That's that slippery slope. There are no guidelines, there are no rules that govern what occurs in an RTA.
Hmm.
So you have an insurance carrier generally behind the scenes pulling strings saying, yeah, we don't want any of those. They either select off yours or they can go to court.
Hmm.
And some have stalled out to the point where leasing companies have come and picked up cars because the adverse appraiser has stalled. There are times when it's appropriate to even rescind the RTA and try to attempt to repair the car and do it at the end if there's still a dispute. That's why we use that term last resort
Hmm.
to try to mitigate any of that meddling. It's tough. It's definitely tough out there, and I feel like it is getting worse.
Yeah. I'm gonna leave it with this. There's always gonna be issues that come up and it's weird because it evolves over time. Like the issues that we have now didn't happen years ago, I think, because more and more carriers and more consumers are being educated as to the process. So that's a positive. I will say lately it has gone smoother. There was a period of time where I think 95% of appraisal clauses end up in umpire. It's a reality. Even when I have conversations with other appraisers, like, listen, I get it. You have a client, I have a client. Doesn't mean that we can't be friendly. I mean, often you and I will talk all the time. Our opponents are often people that we can have a beer with or hang out or we talk to. They're also, a lot of them are probably our umpires. Like we have a very long list of umpires for all segments of the industry that are not only competent, but they're impartial.
And
And I know
experts.
you're proud of it. I'm proud of it. I mean, I think we covered a lot of ground, man. I think this was great. I'm sure as the days pass and the weeks pass, we're going to talk about this again. Kevin, tell us last what you're up to aside from doing RTAs. Where could we find you if we need you? And tell us more about what can we promote for you?
I mean, promotion itself is just consumer protections, basically what Collision Training Institute provides to customers out there. Um, it's a lot of insurance protection, basically, whether it's total loss disputes, diminished value, repair disputes. Um, that's really what we're into. We're more of a family, and the only thing we are and it's the truth.
Yep.
I'll tell you honestly whether it's worth it or not. And sometimes I tell you it's not worth it to pursue. And
Hmm.
something like that, that's really what we're up to. That's what I'm up to. That's what I work in the repair industry. I have a BMW, Lamborghini, Jaguar Land Rover certified repair facility. And the only thing we care about is quality. And the same thing we like to do with our customers with CTI is just give them the best we can in quality. So
Love it. Love it. Well, you heard it here, folks. If you're in a position right now that you may or may not do this, like we always said, it's a last resort. But nevertheless, our job is not easy. And I guess that's where we thrive. We have a lot of fun with it, believe it or not. There is nothing like ending an RTA because it's off your plate. You'll agree with that. So yeah, reach out to us. Find us on www.trycti.com, or you can email us at info@collisiontraininginstitute.com, or just call me. You're probably not going to reach me if you call me. Text me is the best way. And until next time, folks, once again, Collision Training Institute, your advocate when fixing a car, or in this case, when you can't fix your car. So, all right, guys, have a good day, and I'll see you in the next one.
take care.